Hello, everyone. The next talk is by Dr. Shilpaa Anand from BITS Pilani, Hyderabad. If I may formally introduce the speaker to you, she is an alumna of the department, and also she is Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. She has a PhD in Disability Studies from the University of Illinois at Chicago and an MA in English from the University of Hyderabad. Her research is on historical and cultural conceptualizations of disability in the Indian context and cultures of access in higher education institutions. So with this, may I invite Dr. Anand?
Thank you. Okay, I'm very happy to be here because I come from this department, so it gives a warm feeling to be back in the Department of English at the University of Hyderabad. Thank you for inviting me to this symposium. It's been very useful to hear different ways of thinking about literature and culture that I've attended so far. What I'm going to do in this talk is actually begin with a few foundational ideas within disability studies. So I'm going to kind of begin at the beginning. I hope that's okay, and then go on to specifics about literary and cultural disability studies. Let's first begin by thinking about disability as a category of social difference. If we do that, one of the questions that raises is to also consider how it might be similar to and different from other categories of social difference. We've heard about gender justice from an intersectional perspective. You have also discussed other social categories such as race and so on. So what is it about disability that is distinctive? And here one can think about the fluidity. A person can become disabled suddenly, temporarily, and at any point in their lives. So it might vary from certain categories of social difference by virtue of this, that it's on a continuum between being able-bodied and a large latter continuum of being disabled. It can also be invisible. There is a dominant notion sometimes that it has to be something that is palpable, evident, and so on, but it can be invisible. Most disabilities are acquired over the course of a lifetime rather than from birth. Here again, I think it becomes very interesting to think about intersectionality as the previous speaker was speaking, because while we're discussing violence, we're also thinking about acquired impairments, right? Violence that results in different kinds of injuries, some of them disabling for life. Disabilities can be acquired. Disability is also a dynamic category if we consider that, disability only refers to those 21 categories listed in the law. That's the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. You can think of the fact that in 1995, when the previous law existed, it only listed 7 types of disabilities. Now, a law has also moved on to 21. So I was wondering if that would also indicate some kind of a response to the person asking the question about law. How does law then respond to experiential aspects? And here we have one such instance in disability law, because the mobilization that happened before the 2016 Act was passed in India was in fact mobilization that was documenting and providing testimonies of different kinds of disability experiences. So you have a large group, but this is an ever-expanding group. And on my slide, there's the instance of the neurodiversity movement, right? The neurodiversity as a category of social difference that may also not want to fall into the group of disability, might want to identify more in as a cultural difference, and so on. We can talk about that later. And then, of course, that disability as a social difference is inherently different, meaning that it's an umbrella category. It includes different kinds of impairment groups, but also variations in the same kind of impairment. In one of the stories I will discuss later, you'll see that gender and blindness interact in very interesting ways in that story. So it's inherently intersectional. But many times, and since we're working within the context of literature and culture, you'll find that disability is often used metaphorically, right? So one can think of how disability, even within formal structures such as the law and the constitution, is used with a prefix like social disability or civil disability, where its metaphorical use is kind of built into formal structure. So it's a notion that is foundational to other kinds of social marginalization. I'm going to do a quick overview of what disability studies is. Please forgive me if you're already familiar with these ideas. It's not at all an interventionist field, so it's not an applied field or proxy for special education or rehabilitation or physiotherapy or things like that, meaning that it's not a save the world kind of field. Right, but it's a field of a critical inquiry and therefore primarily interdisciplinary. I'm sure you've already discussed this in some of the other lectures on graphic medicine and so on. How there has to be a give and take between different disciplinary notions of positing the same category. So disability may be posited as a variety of diagnosis, different kinds of diagnosis by the medical institutions, by the medical discipline. And then here you have a face-off with lived experiences that may be documented in sociology or anthropology, and narratives that may be documented within literary disciplines. So it's primarily interdisciplinary. But what we want to center, if one may go against Derrida, is that we are going to adopt a disability-centric approach, meaning that the subjectivity of disability is going to be central to approaching any kind of research or any kind of criticism. And by virtue of that, it's also then posited itself in many situations as a kind of an emancipatory academic venture, where it can go beyond ableist structures, where its primary intention then is to dismantle certain kinds of ableist structures. As we go forward, we can think about how literary criticism and literary theory also posit certain kinds of ableist structures, or how literary criticism itself requires a certain amount of dismantling. I'll use a quote from Tobin Siebers, who writes extensively on disability theory and aesthetics, to say that disability studies does not treat disease or disability, hoping to cure or avoid them. It studies the social meanings, symbols, and stigmas attached to disability identity, and asks how they relate to enforced systems of exclusion and expression. So this quote is kind of capturing what disability studies is not and what it is. But I also want to add the caveat that it need not be only about identity. It need not only be about those who identify as disabled, going back to a series of questions that came up earlier. It also explores the epistemic potential of living with disability. So disability is considered as the center of knowledge production, as a series of lived experiences that can also tell us different things about going about the world. If you're familiar with M and the Big Whom, then you also know that here's a character whose insights into the world are letting us know certain kinds of norms that shape this world, both physically as well as in an abstract way. So disabled people's lives, lived experiences are knowledge producing, right? They produce certain kinds of knowledge that need to be centered. It contests the dominant discourses of medicine, psychiatry, and education. And I hope that in the interaction, we'll also be able to think about what are the ways in which this can be done, what are the ways in which certain forms of institutionalized knowledge systems get contested through disability studies. So, drawing on all of these ideas, we can then say that what is of interest within disability studies is actually this construction of the normal. It's not so much the construction of disability, but it's actually the construction of that which is normalized, that which is the norm, and that which is assumed to be normal. To draw on Davis's words, he says the problem is not the person with disabilities. The problem is the way that normalcy is constructed to create the problem of the disabled person, right? That the disabled individual is then presented as the problem. And what are these structures that create that situation? Normal, therefore, is a position from which people deem other people to be lacking, different, dysfunctional, deformed, impaired, inadequate, invalid. So there's a series of ideas here. They're not just synonyms, but they're also invested invested in structures and constitutive of different kinds of structures. Another concept that comes in very handy. I'm just going through a keywords kind of list before we get into certain kinds of theoretical ideas. Is the idea of normate, and Rosemary Garland Thompson's development of this term normate talks about the constructed identity of those who, by way of the bodily configurations and cultural capital they assume, can step into a position of authority and wield the power it grants them. So basically, a sense of privilege, right? That there is a certain privilege of being able-bodied that one is not usually conscious of. That the ramp in this hall primarily becomes an aesthetic when none of us is having to use it. That a large part of the external segments of this building and the structure also make the ramp as an aesthetic while also providing access in some sense. So the constructed identity of those who, by way of the bodily configurations and cultural capital they assume, can step into a position of authority and wield the power it grants them. That there is a certain power in being able-bodied or in being sane, if one wants to also consider sanism as something that is constantly constituted, particularly in academic spaces like ours, where we're assuming that we can continue for 3 hours and sit and listen to these lectures without taking a break, that nobody has a lower back pain, that there are all our minds are focused on everything that is being said, that we're not wandering, and so on. So an ordinary practice in the production of normalcy is to make it noticeable to the normative order that one has noticed that the other departs from normality. What, are you crazy? Or I don't mean to pry, but have you always been disabled? Or I would kill myself if it happened to me. These set of responses also set the tone for a consideration of encounters that happen within literature. You'll see that a large amount of writing is also about this encounter between ableist structures and a disabled individual, or an individual who recognizes or becomes aware of their disability in relation to these ableist structures. But the point here is that there is a certain kind of power. There was earlier a mention of Foucault. Here's the idea that stems from there. So, just going on to the other word I presented in my abstract, which is ableism, right? And how do we think of ableism when one is already familiar with sexism, racism, and other forms of oppression? Right? Ableism is the valuing of able bodiedness and the devaluing of disablement. So, in ableism, we're thinking of deep rooted structures and ideas about health, beauty, productivity. Again, a 2-day packed symposium is one such structure. No offense to anyone, just to illustrate a point. So these are deep structures that can be investigated. And ableism can be determined by the experience of barriers that are put in place by different systems and is not an experience only of people designated as disabled. I think that this is very important to focus on, that ableism need not be experienced only by those who are disabled, that it can be an experience of anyone and everyone, because it always operates as a deep structure. We can know about the many ways in which ableism works by collecting together our observations of ableism in action. How does it operate? Facial beauty standards, unspoken standards of social acceptability, body shaming. Sorry, my font size is ableist. Body shaming and ideas of the perfect ideal bodies, behavior and dressing, where there are moral standards, there are ideas of social acceptability, gender standards, expectations to fulfill certain kinds of norms. That is also an ableist structure. Age as being determined by bodily factors, where you have hair color, modes of walking, speech, voice, all of these things constituting the idea of what being aged means. Homophobia and transphobia are also ableist structures, because they're setting the standards of heteronormative behavior, right? There is so any kind of standard setting, right? Standards are the problem. Standards are what Leonard Davis, Rosemary Garland Thompson, and others are talking about here, that the standardization is in fact the focus of studies in ableism. Racism, where you have standards of racial perfection or superiority. Casteism, where enforcing caste hierarchies and graded inequalities, to use Ambedkar's phrase, on the basis of bodily, cognitive, and emotional standards. Right? Casteism is also built on these three things: bodily, cognitive, and emotional kind of status marking. Region, ethnicity, nationality, how are bodily and cognitive standards set through the standardization of such geopolitical identities as well. We are in the midst of a war that will not be spoken about. It's quite easy to see within that context the way in which all of this is also operating. Not to mention, of course, that a war like the one going on in Palestine is also creating circumstances for the return of certain impairments that the world had long forgotten, such as polio. Right? So we'll go on later to think about the concept of debility. Then, of course, I put it at the end, I tucked it away at the end to think of educational structures, right? Educational structures as being ableist schooling systems, curricular standards, extracurricular standards, undergraduate education in different disciplines. We've been watching a wide range of debates about the NEET and so on, about a wide set of public exams that are taken, and the way in which there is a certain embodiment also that one has to perform in order to be this medical student, in order to be a certain kind of engineering student, and so on. From there, I'll go on to literary and cultural disability studies. This has emerged as an area of study that's worth its own journals. So, if one has to mark the emergence of a field in terms of the journals that get established in the world, then this would be one such field. I'm interested here in the encounters that happen between ableist structures. You now have a sampling of what ableist structures can be. I hope that we're all aware that it has nothing to do with disabled bodies. It has nothing to do with people who might look different from the norm. But ableist structures and cultural expression, right? Are there norms within literature? Are literary practices also putting in place certain tendencies of expression, right? That we have to engage with. So, of the series of encounters that we can discuss, one would be within the world of a text, within the plot, within the story, where you have certain encounters that happen between an individual character and a structure that they're surrounded by. It could be a patriarchal structure, or it could be an encounter with the medical system itself that happens. The encounters can also happen with conventions of expression. So later, I want you to give me instances of how genres and media and forms of literary practices are also, setting up certain models or expectations. They set up standardizations, right? What are these, and how do we engage with that? Acts of reading, viewing, listening, and consuming, it's a little pointless to think about disability studies or literary disability studies without engaging with questions of access, right? And now we are in the presence of a multimedia world that's constantly around us, where all of us are using voice to text, right, or text to voice on your WhatsApp messages, where you just read out to your phone and it types up the whole thing. So, what does it mean to think of consumption also in terms of different kinds of embodied experiences and reception and so on? Then, of course, encounters within academic contexts, right? What are a series of ableist structures that we can consider, and how do those structures encounter different forms of expression as well within the academic context? So it may have become clear that we're not going to be dealing only with aesthetics, that aesthetics is tied to ethics as well as politics, as I assume most of the lectures in this symposium have been presenting themselves. Right, so LCDS is just short for Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, brings together study of politics, ethics, and aesthetics. There is a certain potential within disability perspectives, that is the lived experience of people living with different kinds of disabilities, or the exploration of disability in literary writing, that has a potential to transform understandings of structure, genre, and narrative. Right? It has this kind of a potential, but to what extent is that exhausted or released? Let's begin with the idea that the presence of a disability, and here I'm thinking about an everyday encounter that any one of us may have, always begs a narrative, right? Or it prompts a narrative. That the presence of a scar, you might look questioningly at a friend who's acquired a scar. You might look questioningly at a friend who begins using a crutch. in the middle of the semester, and so on. There is always a prompt for a narrative that is built in there, and literature is full of instances of disabled characters because it offers an opportunity to explore something that is unknown, to explore something that is also considered to be unknowable. These are two quotes from Mitchell and Snyder's work, who you'll come up against very often if you're doing literary disability studies. The very knowability that consolidates the need to tell a story about it. So the teller of the story is the one who knows what it means to what it means to have acquired that scar, or use a crutch in a campus like this, and so the narrative is produced. Potential of disability perspectives include the ability to transform understandings of structure, genre, and narrative form. And here, let's think about the tragic form, or the classical tragedy as one where there is usually the acquisition of a disability, right? So the Aristotelian fall of the character also requires that there has to be the acquisition of a certain deformity. A deformity may be congenital, but there's a realization of what that deformity does not permit. Or there is the acquisition of madness, if one considers Lear and Macbeth, and a variety of well-known Shakespearean plays. So that's one way of going about it. It also has the potential to destabilize established theoretical paradigms in literary criticism. Let's take reader response theory, right, where you have primarily a phenomenological approach to thinking about what the reader's responses are to a certain text, what goes on in the mind, and so on. And how does an auditory text then lead to a different way of considering this entire theory? Okay, so it also provides the opportunity, which is somewhat provocative, to analyze literary texts where one can observe the way in which able-bodiedness is constructed, where one can observe the way in which normalcy may be produced within the world of the text. So it's not necessary to have a disabled character, right? It's not necessary also to have an event where a disability may be acquired. Other kinds of studies that have been taken up within literary disability studies include the reimagination and rewriting of literary and cultural history. So Davis does this in his book Obsession, where he uses obsession or obsessive compulsive disorder, whatever you might want to call it, right? A lived experience, a phenomenon, a diagnosis, etc., as a lens through which one can look at all of literary writing, right? What are its earliest expressions? Does it exist as itself, right? Is OCD something that is prevalent over time and place, or does it emerge under specific circumstances? Ian Hacking is another name you might want to note, because he has book-length studies coming from a very philosophical paradigm, thinking about this proliferation of characters with certain types of disabilities in literature, right? And he speaks about the multiple personality condition as one that becomes a fashion for literary writers at one point in time. It was something that was called the Sibyl craze. Maybe you're too far away from it to know it as a popular phenomenon, but this is something that happened in the 70s and 80s. And what you find is the proliferation of a character with multiple personalities in a wide range of literary and cinematic texts. So Hacking's work, in fact, asks us to think about what that kind of proliferation also means, right? Why is there this sudden interest in a disability and then the complete fading out of it? Another book of interest may be David Bolt's Meta-Narratives of Blindness, where what these scholars are doing is that they're tracing literary history, they're tracing responses to literature in criticism and theory from the perspective of very specific impairment groups. Okay. Let me just give you also some instances of emotional experiences that dominate literature, which can be studied from a disability perspective. This, I think, becomes significant because we have affect studies, where thinking about the emotional landscape is crucial to also understanding the social world and so on. So if one has to make a quick list of emotions that dominate literary texts, one could think of pity, disgust. Right, disgust is a strong emotion. Disgust is something that keeps coming up in also Dalit literature, where there is the ableist structure of casteism, which is operating and resulting in these encounters that give us experiences of disgust. Also humiliation, right? Fear, an emotion that's strongly exploited in horror, in the Gothic, where you have characters who look different, also bringing up the response of fear in individuals. Anger, and one would say anger is probably something that's strongly prevalent in disability life writing, where the reaction to these standard discourses of disability is also to speak out in anger, to speak out against some of these normal and normate structures. Okay, so overall, then a few trends that we might notice is that there is a certain kind of reinserting the body as a site of knowledge. And here's where one might want to think of disability studies in relation to gender studies, where in gender studies there has been a back and forth between whether one should locate gender within the body or think of gender as a different kind or different kind of structure. So here is a disability trying to bring the body back into focus in certain ways. And it's also enabled imagining perspectives that are radically different from the norms, right? So you'll see this also prevalent here. I want to give you an instance of how certain media can also be operationalized or differently used in relation to the presence of a disabled character. And perhaps the diving bell and the butterfly is a case in point. If you're not familiar with the film, it may be interesting to go to that film later, because here you have a character who's acquired paralysis through an accident, and the only functioning part of his body is an eye. So the film is told from the perspective of the character. So what I'm pointing to is that there is an interesting exploration of cinema as a medium that becomes possible because of the kind of disability this character has, that there's a relationship between medium and the disabled character also that's useful to explore. Here I will get into a few theories of representation, and obviously, I'm also thinking of representation here in the Stuart Hall sense, where an instance of disability in a text is also representative of that particular lived experience of a specific impairment. So here are a few premises. I can give you the names of the critical and theoretical texts from which I'm drawing on these. Unlike the subjects of other marginality discourses, disability proliferates in literature, right? So that has been identified as one thing that we might want to keep in mind as we study disability in literature. It's not absent. We cannot speak about its absence, but what you see is multiple presences. So canons across the world are replete with disabled characters, but only recently has that developed a critical approach to engage with their materiality. So one of the dyads that you will notice here is this difference between the metaphorical presence of disability and the material experience of disability. How often does disability figure, metaphorically, and what are the moments where it does figure in a more material way? So, canonical instances, of course, are 100,000, but here are just a few to get us started. That's Tiny Tim and Bertha Mason, and also Mr. Rochester, who becomes blind, right? If we consider that disabilities are not always congenital, they're also acquired. Disability's presence in literature has been restricted to symbolic or metaphorical uses. So you can think of any number of instances within the myths and fairy tales where there is a pedagogic purpose also being served through the use of a disabled character, right? That there is a didactic tale or a cautionary tale that's very often the framework within which you have characters with disabilities. Normal or normalcy is usually not narrated without descriptions, and narratives of the normal or disruptions of disabilities or of non-normative deviations. So just to explain that idea, the experience of being normal does not prompt a narrative as much as the presence of disability prompts a narrative. And if at all normalcy or able-bodiedness has to be narrated in any way, it has to depend on the presence of a disabled character. It has to depend on the narrative saying, normalcy is the absence of any kind of abnormality, or health is the absence of ill health, and so on. David Mitchell again, and this idea comes from a text called Narrative Prosthesis and the Materiality of Metaphor. Disability has been used throughout history as a crutch on which literary narratives can lean on for their representational power, disruptive potential, and social critique. Mitchell identifies as a person with disability. All of the critics I've been referring to are also disabled people. Is drawing on the metaphor of crutch here to think about the way in which different narrative structures rely on disability. Right? They lean on disability in order to become horror, in order to become a didactic tale, in order to become comic. Right? So there's a reliance. So it's a way of thinking about it from a reverse perspective. But what disability does then is that it also has representational power. We've already made a note of metaphors and metaphors used in language. Various kinds of rhetorical conversation that we make is replete with disability, right? We're always asking each other not to provide lame excuses. Lameness is very important there. It's serving as, it's fulfilling that representational power. Disruptive potential and social critique. Just to go over those in a minute. But what is this way in which disability in a text acts as a prosthetic device, acts as a crutch? The description goes as this. First, a deviance or marked difference is exposed to the reader, right? Second, a narrative consolidates the need for its own existence by calling for an explanation of the deviation's origins and formative consequences. Third, the deviance is brought from the periphery of the concerns to the center of the story to come. And fourth, the remainder of the story rehabilitates or fixes the deviance in some manner. So please note their use of disability metaphors to kind of reclaim the metaphorical space, but from the lived experience of disability, where you have both crutch, prosthesis, and rehabilitation being used. So this is the process that usually works out in a story, right? The way in which disability plays out in a story. So the representational power of disability comes from its metaphorical uses. Any number of evil characters who are also people with disabilities. You might find a limp, a character with a one eye, very prominent villains in several cases. Also scars, disfigured faces, and so on. These create and contribute to a discourse around bodily difference and their social meaning. So, the presence of such characters in literature are not only giving you an aesthetic, but we're also getting a certain sensibility or an insight into the social ordering of able-bodiedness and disablement. Right? The presence or the recurrence of such characters is offering this. The disruptive potential of disability may be noted in a few of these texts where the characters resist or refuse cultural scripts assigned to them, where there is a certain contestation that one sees on the part of these characters. That there's something that rebels, within the range of expectations that is imposed on gendered characters or characters that are supposed to be experiencing partition. If one takes Lenny in Ice Candy Man, what you see is that there's an irreverence, right? And the irreverence stands in stark contrast to what the community is experiencing, what the people are experiencing in relation to the Punjab partition, and so on. So also one could consider the character Rudar in Vishal Bharadwaj's adaptation of Hamlet, Haider, where you have a certain deliberate reversal of expectations through these characters. Critique of social realities, and I suppose that a lot of this work is also drawing on Foucauldian analysis of institutional power, right, as well as something that may have been brought up in the discussions on graphic medicine and so on, where you have institutions of power that are being critiqued, right, and these are also then critiques of social reality. The harmful effects of carceral institutions and medical and psychiatric practices that we might see through the Yellow Wallpaper, Mrs. Dalloway, Toba Tek Singh, M and the Big Whom. I've also listed a couple of mainstream films from a slightly long ago time. It's not a very updated set, but you could add those, where both Guzarish and the Tamil film Mori give you certain kinds of critique of the way in which certain expectations are set around disabled people, right? Or certain expectations are enforced on disabled people, and their presence within the text then interrogates those expectations and realities. A lot of the contemporary work, and we will be taking up an instance of that in the second lecture, is then to change the narrative. What you've seen so far in a variety of instances that we've looked at is that there is a certain standardization of narrative, right? There is this movement from that discovery of the disability to the way in which that disability has to be rehabilitated narratively within the space of the text. So some of the contemporary texts where they may include disability life writing, but also speculative fiction where there is a kind of revision of disabled characters from the past. And Anne Finger's collection of stories is one such very good instance. I can give you the exact reference later, but Anne Finger is the name of the writer who uses this form of the speculative fiction to revise historical disabled persons, but also characters like Helen and Frida. So she has one story in which there's an encounter between Helen Keller and Frida Kahlo, which makes for once again a very important kind of exploration of that which might be unknown or considered unfamiliar. I'll move on to Atto Quayson's typology of disability representation. And here in Atto Quayson's work, Atto is spelled A-T-O. Sorry, I don't have it on that slide. Quayson's work looks at modern and postmodern literature, and it considers the position of disabled characters within the text and the plot. Right. So, what is the signification of the character in various texts? Is there a potential in indexing others? I'll come to that. I mean, are disabled characters also prevalent in a lot of post-colonial fiction, where their presence is indexed by another kind of subalternity, right? A social difference that may be presented through a certain embodiment, a social difference that may be embodied through insanity, for instance. That has, of course, been discussed in relation to Bertha Mason, right? Where the subalternity is kind of given a material presence within the narrative of the text through disability. Okay, so here's Quayson's set of disability typology. For one, he considers that disability may be used in literary text to index other kinds of othering, right? Where you may have racial difference or gender difference that may be plotted as disability. Another aspect or another type of representation that you might find is when disability figures as a null set or a moral set. Let's take fairy tales where you have the encounter with somebody who is unsightly, consider Beauty and the Beast, right? Where the presence of difference or disability is already marked out in the beast. And it is the response that this young woman will produce in relation to that person that makes her either good or bad, right? That's the entire idea that's centered there. So that's one other kind. Disability as moral deficit or evil, again, something that's very prevalent through a wide range of familiar tales. Disability as articulation of disjuncture between the thematic and narrative vectors. Here you have the case of Lenny, who has to have a polio operation, right, in that very moment that is politically very fraught. So you have it as a theme that's running through the text, but you also have her polio affected limb becoming very symbolic of what Pakistan might be, right? Of this future of partition, right? Of the after of partition. So. Of course, one is not even thinking here of the fact that Bapsi Sidhwa herself lived with a disability. That in some ways, Lenny is that autobiographical representation. Very often, disability is used as epiphany, where it's something that arrives at the end. It's a certain kind of a tale that uses disability as the final reveal, right? A startling discovery. Disability as a signifier of ritual insight, the idea that is common in blind representation, where you may find that the character is also presented as someone who has certain spiritual capabilities. So here we're thinking actually of this figure of the supercrip, right? The supercrip that also may have figured in the comic discussions or or the gaming discussions. I'm not sure, but you have immense possibilities that are embodied because of the bodily difference. Disability as inarticulable and enigmatic, tragic insight, a hot favorite again in a variety of narratives where it's present as something that cannot be explained but only needs to be known. That it's something that cannot be represented in narrative, right? And the number of instances that one may have of that. Also as hermeneutical impasse, where something that needs to be interpreted in order for the plot to move forward becomes a reason to insert a disabled character, where it's the only thing that will do the work of this impossibility of interpretation that exists. One could also consider crime thrillers where it is a certain kind of neurodiversity of the individual that may be making it possible for such a crime to exist, and so on. Then, of course, you have the idea of disability as something that's universal. If one considers Toba Singh again, where the narrative is constantly drawing attention to how the world is populated by madness, or it's the world that's mad and everything inside the asylum that seems somewhat more orderly. Of course, it's not helping too much when we think of revising metaphorical uses of madness, but here's one instance that is dominant within literature. So Quayson's conclusion through his book Aesthetic Nervousness, which is where I was drawing the typology from, is that the presence of a disabled character actually produces a certain kind of crisis where even the protocols of representation are contested, right? Where the representation of that character need to be revised, or standard forms of representation are inadequate and falls short, right? So a disabled character is rarely only an aesthetic creation. The character's deformation raises questions about the relationship between aesthetics and ethics as well. It's not merely for being unsightly that you have a certain character, but the text may also be sometimes unbeknownst to itself, revealing how these structures of what is considered unsightly, what is considered sightly are produced. How much time do I have?
Another time, please. 5 10.
Okay, I'll just wrap up then. Just also wanted to leave a few ideas with you that you could use later. One is the whole idea of crip aesthetics, where in literary studies, we're thinking of how a text may be cripped, or how one could crip one's reading of a text. And here, the idea of cripping is drawing on the sensibility that's communicated through queerness, right? Where in the in crypt, what we're thinking about is in the absence of an obviously disabled character or an obviously disability-centric plot, is it still possible to read crypt into it, right? Crypt is a deliberate overturning, just like a queer of a previously derogatory term that has kind of been reclaimed for purposes of aesthetics. So let me just end with one. Yeah, I'll end with this concept of debility that Jasbir Puar proposes, because when we are considering Indian writing in English, or writings that are coming from contexts that are very distant or different from the context that conceptualize a lot of disability studies theory, we might be interested in the way in which disability is acquired many times, not because of any particular individual circumstances, but also because of certain states of war or work-related oppression. So in her book, The Right to Maim, she looks at the war machine and also the work machine, where debility foregrounds the slow wearing down of populations instead of the event of becoming disabled. Right, so it's not a one shot thing. It's something that's gradual, that may work out. While the latter concept creates and hinges on the narrative of before and after for individuals who will eventually be identified as disabled. So in this segment, she's discussing debility in relation to disability, or as a contrast to disability, because disability also becomes a kind of status that can be claimed. It's an official status. I began by talking about the laws or social policy. It's possible to have a position of disability in the eyes of the state. But Puar is referring to circumstances where debility might be the only experience of disability, where there is a certain kind of perpetual state of debilitation precisely through foreclosing the social, cultural, and political translation to disability, that one might be a subject of circumstances like an environmental hazard or an ongoing war, right? But not have any claim on a certain disabled citizenship, not have any claim of being an official category, let's say. So that then becomes possible for us to think through with this idea of disability. All right, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anand, for that detailed survey of disability studies. We'll take a few quick questions.
Thank you for the talk, ma'am. And I was actually thinking of the more varied representations of people with disabilities, especially in the digital medium nowadays, with Instagram or TikTok or YouTube Shorts, where you have people with disabilities, of course, coming from countries and spaces with more accessibility, and they put forward their stories, their everyday routines, and the ways they go about work, or the ways they live in families or create families. And I was also wondering, while this also increases representation, Does the digital medium also sort of reinforce new forms of stereotypes, of productivity driven stereotypes of people with disability? And how does disability studies look at this connection between disability and productivity?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. Disability, in fact, disability studies in particular emerges from two contexts. One is the US one, which is largely what we are turning to here when we look at cultural disability studies. The other one would be the more social model way of thinking about it, which is from the UK context, and the entire formulation of disability there is in relation to productivity, is in relation to industrialization, and how the experience of industrialization produces this category of disability, right? So, that's just a reference point. But to think about what you're saying in relation to how shifts in media also enable different forms of cultural expression. Yes, that's very true, because then it becomes possible for sign language to continue to be used through, let's say, a video call, right? Or sign language to become a certain kind of a translation enabled by technology, and that's some of the most recent access and assistive tech that's emerging on the field. So yes, the familiarity with disability has been growing. It's been because of certain kinds of mobilizations that have happened by virtue of social groups participating for rights and justice, but also the way in which technology facilitates cultural expression. So I hope that responds.
Hello, ma'am. Such a wonderful presentation. So, ma'am, my question actually comes from the perspective of diaspora. So, basically, we know that diaspora is something when people stay one place and they start living for another place, and diaspora may be voluntary or forcefully. So, my question is that as I'm from West Bengal, so in West Bengal, basically Bengali language is spoken, but here in the campus, English and Hindi is spoken, but outside the campus, Telugu is the dominant language. So it is very much difficult for me to understand the languages. So my question is that, can you connect the cultural disability with diaspora?
Yeah, I mean, there's no harm in exploring it. As I said, disability studies is just a framework that allows us to explore different kinds of experiences. But I think when we're talking about cultural differences and the way in which there may be a kind of linguistic hegemony, one would have to consider a certain kind of experience of power that's operating through a particular language, right? And the best case that one could draw in an analogy to would be deaf identity, where deaf with a capital D is a cultural identity that's being held up by deaf groups across the world, where their claim is away from disability. So there's a non-identity with disability and an embracement of identity as a linguistic minority. That sign language should also be considered as a separate language and so on. But one can think of diaspora in many ways in relation to disability experiences, because what you have in the context of epidemics and also the COVID pandemic was a large-scale migration that was happening, right? Migration of working class people within the country. I mean, one could extend the idea of diaspora to think about that. It created a very interesting set of circumstances where there were various kinds of bodily harm that one acquired while trying to move from the urban centers back to one's villages and towns, but also a kind of stigma that one experienced at the entry of the town and the village, where you were not allowed in because you were considered to be coming from the most infected parts of the country. That the urban centers were the ones that were spreading the COVID virus faster than anything else. So I think that that's another way in which one could think about the intersections of
Thank you, ma'am.
disability experience in diaspora.
Thank you for the lecture, ma'am. My question is, what is the role of disability in global context? Like, how the economic and cultural differences affect the treatment of disability in world level?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a single answer to that. One of the ways in which one could approach it is to also think about disabled people in the workforce, right? And there have been attempts by virtue of various rights and justice groups operating to include disabled people in the workforce. There's also a certain kind of corporate culture of DEI, right? This diversity, equity, inclusion, that's now becoming, if one had to go back to hacking, something that's fashionable, right? To include disability as part of the corporate culture, where demonstrations of, or displays of accessible situations, context, infrastructure, and so on is also thought of as a kind of a move up, right? But there's a lot of work that goes on about how disability is also very often thought of as a non-harmful category of difference. It's not as disruptive in the world as race or queer sexualities or caste. So very often it becomes a diversity that one yearns to have, right? Just by virtue of how it does not seem to be socially threatening. So, in part culture, in part economy.
We'll take one last question before we break for lunch. One last quick question.
Hello, my question is regarding Treasure Island. So in Treasure Island, amongst the pirates, there are various characters like Long John Silver, who's missing a limb, and there's Black Dog who's missing 2 fingers, Blind Pew who's blind. So basically, it's sort of also used aesthetically by the author in a sense too, because Blind Pew, in descriptions of Blind Pew, is said to be horrible, soft-spoken, and eyeless. Which relates to what you were saying about the emotive elements, which are popularly generated by disability. But this disability of the characters of the pirates, like Long John Silver is one of the most feared characters in the story. So he's a very competent antagonist, despite his disability. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how far does something like Treasure Island fail or succeed in representing something like disability? Because there's one thing I missed as well, what I wanted to say was, here there are this split between 2 groups. There's the pirates and the other people, the Jim Hawkins group, who are chasing this treasure. So here the pirates are also a separate quote unquote disabled group, because they are competing with the British naval empire. So, and they're also mostly disabled people in that category. So Stevenson portrays them as such, but of course he probably doesn't intend to portray disability as a category. But as readers, how far can we say that it succeeds or fails in representing disability?
Yeah, I would first of all want to disabuse you of the attempt to have a good representation or a bad representation, right? Or a successful representation or a non-successful one, because I don't know how fruitful that might be, but rather to think of the circumstances within the world of the text, and the way in which they're portrayed. If these are impairments that are acquired by these various characters, right? To what extent is that described? What is the way in which it is described? But also think of Treasure Island within its own realm of literary publication and production, and how it might be interacting with certain kinds of circumstances in relation to disability. Okay, so what is its time of publication? Yeah, so towards the end of the 19th century. And what is it that's going on in relation to disability? 19th century is a very fascinating time to use for disability studies, because you have any number of instances of monsters, freaks, and mad women that populate all those novels. But it also gives you an opportunity to think about how the idea of monstrosity moves from something that's fairly abstract and fearful to something that's very concrete, right? If one traces it particularly from the time of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Jekyll and Hyde, the use of the concept monstrosity through the series of canonized texts also gives you a sense of how there may be social shifts in the way in which disabled people might be viewed, right? Though that word is never used. Disability may not figure as a concept at all. But yeah, I would advise you to think about various kinds of circumstances that produce something as a disability, various kinds of barriers that are presented before disabled characters. Those may be more interesting ways to think of representation.
With that, I think it's time to conclude the session. So thank you so much, Dr. Anand.
Thank you.